Russia said, well, okay, we'll shoot those down, and have a listen.
I don't want to discuss such questions, whether this or that will happen or not. We just hope the parties will avoid steps which can become a provocation and destabilize such a shaky situation.
Yeah, so this is Russia's president spokesperson talking about that people should come to their senses and that they should talk it over first and, you know, not speculate, not make any more threats, because there has been an abundance of those.
You have to wonder what happened, what conversations went on between Trump's first and second tweet there, how he went from get ready to stop the arms race as a question, saying Russia needs us to help them with their economy. You know, what kind of conversations went on in the White House that made him then tweet that out as well, saying let's be friends, because that's what, for the most part, we've seen coming from Trump, that working with Russia would be good. Having a good relationship with Russia would only be a productive stance for America. And then it comes to get ready Russia. And this all comes after what we heard at the UN Security Council as well. A lot of threats coming from them as well. I believe that was yesterday.
Yes, it was. Yes, it happened yesterday, and there was, again, a barrage of accusations. But, you know, when you mention that thing about Russia needing the United States, Trump saying that Russia needs the United States to help grow their economy, looking at the atmosphere, at this latest trend, the United States seem to be getting into more and more trade wars. Like, they already have a trade war with China. They were on the brink of a trade war with Europe until Trump announced that Europe would not be subject to new tariffs, that it is going to impose import tariffs. So, for all we know, this could be yet another threat against Russia, because not so long ago Russia was slapped by the U.S. sanctions over the Skripal case, and we've seen Russian markets plummeting, you know, the biggest loss being like, what, 50%? Russia's aluminum giant losing 50%. So this could be a threat, really. But going back to the situation in Syria, this has been far from a rational discussion, really. And the bottom line is, Trump is tweeting about a potential clash, military clash between two nuclear nations.
Exactly, which is extremely frightening, but it's not really clear whether or not he will move forward on that, and it's also not clear who's going to be with him on that decision. As we mentioned earlier, a government spokesperson from France has said that they still have not made any decisions on whether they will be taking action against Syria at this point already, and just in general, there's just been some outliers saying maybe there should be an investigation first, correct?
Yes, indeed. That was what Russia's resolution at the UN Security Council was about. Let the OPCW, the UN chemical body, do its job on site, produce some results, some conclusions out of their investigation, and then make the decisions as to who and in what way should be punished. Excuse me. And the OPCW experts will only set to get on the site of the attack in the Syrian city of Douma by the end of the week. Judging by Trump's tweets, the strike could be launched any minute now. We do know that a fleet of the U.S. aircraft carrier is heading towards the Mediterranean, accompanied by some destroyers, and also USS Donald Cook will be joining in it in the Mediterranean. From what we know, apparently that fleet is set to reach the Mediterranean as early as Thursday, and so this is when we could expect the strikes. Maybe even earlier, really. So that's what we know about the strikes, and we know that this whole action is based on very few facts, I should say, because where did this accusation of a chemical attack, these report group known as the White Helmets? They market themselves as a civil defense group. They say they're saving lives. They help get people out from the rubble after the Syrian government's bombing.
And they actually get a lot of international support as well, don't they?
They do. I think they almost got nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and their documentary, a Netflix documentary, looking at their work, also became a...
Welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The drive towards war against Syria is unmistakable. The pretext is still another alleged chemical attack. As usual, no evidence is presented. As usual, conclusions are drawn before an independent investigation. But this time, there's a difference. Syria can defend itself and has powerful allies. We live in very dangerous times. Cross-talking Syria, I'm joined by my guest, Joe Loria in Washington. He's the editor-in-chief of ConsortiumNews.com and author of How I Lost by Hillary Clinton, with the foreword by Julian Assange. Also in Washington, we have Michael Maloof. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. And in New York, we have Richard Murphy. He is a former U.S. career ambassador to Syria and currently an adjunct scholar at the Middle East Institute. All right, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go to Joe first in Washington. It seems to me that, we have as president somebody very different than ran as president. As little as a week ago, Donald Trump made a very public announcement that we'd be withdrawing from Syria. Fast forward up to the last few days or so, it looks like he's being forced to stay there, even if he doesn't want to stay there. We have an entire chorus of the media driving for war. The deep state is on board, of course. John Bolton is in place, and I have to make one exception. At least Tucker Carlson over at Fox at least decided to express his dissent here. Where are we, Joe? Where does this all stand? Go ahead.
Well, the fact that he wanted to withdraw from Syria makes it even less likely that the Syrian government was behind this attack. We are seeing what we've seen for a long, long time, a pattern of deception by the U.S. government, depending on who the enemy of the day is. If you want to go to war against Spain, they blew up the Maine. The North Vietnamese attacked a ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Saddam had WMD. Russia invaded Ukraine, shot down a Malaysian airline, stole an election, tried to kill a former double agent in Britain, and now is somehow implicated in this chemical attack. This is what governments do. But there are also two other parties beside government. There's the press and people. So governments lie, all governments lie, some worse than others, but the press's job is supposed to filter that and defend the public against government lies. But we see now a press that's completely obsessed with its own fame, with its careerism, with living through vicarious power of government, and they are letting the public down so that these these conclusions before investigations begin, as you pointed out at the beginning, are being let to stand. And this is, as you also said, very, very dangerous right now.
Richard, is on the table now full regime change by use of military force? Do you think that's in the cards right now? Go ahead, Richard, in New York.
I see no evidence that the administration has gone back to a position that you could say was early Obama, that it was time for Assad to step aside. I think this administration has reconciled itself that Assad is president and is likely to stay for a while.
Okay, Michael, but that doesn't really square with what we've heard over the last few days here. We have, Nikki Haley going off the rail. I mean, I thought Samantha Power was off the, had wandered off the reservation, but Nikki Haley takes the cake there. And then we also, and I'm glad Joe mentioned it, we really have the drums of war in the media. It seems to me that they really want to box Trump in. If he does nothing, then he's bluster. If he does something, it's against international law. And it may be the law of unintended consequences by getting involved in this war. You never know, because if you look over the last 18 years, these military adventures never end the way they expect. Go ahead, Michael.
No, I think you're right. I think that even though President Trump wanted to get out, I think that other people who are surrounding him are much more determined that he stay. And actually, the fact that John Bolton is now the National Security Advisor, who was the fellow who really wanted us to go into Iraq on the premise that there was WMD. I think that the administration is slowly turning toward regime change again. I think that that's what they're going to go after. And the whole idea, I think, as far as
victims, we've tried that before.
You see, Mrs. Haley said it out loud. They're used to telling the world about kids Russia's friends killed. With the latest chemical attack call, like always, the American media were there to spread the word.
These images are so disturbing. The children, the families in such distress.
What you see around their mouth appears to be foam. That's a sign of a chemical attack.
Horrific images of Syrian children fighting for breath. The U.S. accusing Russia and Syrian President Assad.
Ruined children's lives. Thousands of graves that weren't meant to be dug so early. Stories from war-ravaged parts of the Middle East will make you cry, and all of them must be told. But I can't help asking why, for U.S. officials or journalists, these agonizing stories from Mosul, Iraq, or Raqqa in Syria don't exist. No, on some channels, you'll never see their stories. Maybe because their scars are, how America's top military man puts it, a fact of life.
Civilian casualties are a fact of life.
Civilians will get caught in the crossfire. Civilians will get hurt. Civilians will get killed.
If you want to liberate your towns and cities, it comes at a price.
The responsibility for civilian casualties in Iraq and Syria lies with ISIS.
That is on them, not on us.
We are the good guys, and the innocent people on a battlefield know the difference.
Kids' lives in another Arab country, Yemen, have turned into a disaster. That's a fact, so say humanitarian groups. And it is a fact of life, in a sense that Washington is pretty much at hand when Saudi Arabia is bombing civilians across the border. The Saudis have spent billions on what Uncle Sam has to offer, and Donald Trump loves selling guns to Riyadh.
In terms of dollars, $3 billion, $533 million, $525 million. That's peanuts for you. Should have increased it.
Besides, in case someone forgot, the Americans themselves have for years been taking away innocent lives in Afghanistan.
When the explosions happened, I was with my uncle and cousins. American soldiers opened fire and a bullet flew by my face.
This is my younger brother, Faradullah, who was killed by US troops. This is my brother Sharafat, also killed. And this is my father, Zir Gul, who was killed as well. I want the government to avenge my father and kill his killers.
The Russian regime, whose hands are all covered in the blood of Syrian children, cannot be ashamed by pictures of its victims. We've tried that before.
I'm Ilya Petrenko in Moscow.
Good afternoon. The armed forces of the Russian Federation and the Syrian government have finalized a major humanitarian operation in Damascus suburb of Eastern Ghouta. During this operation, 100,000 people have been evacuated, including 20,396 militants and 38,000 of their family members. Right now, we are finalizing the evacuation of militants from the suburb of Douma. This is the final town that they are leaving. Over the past 24 hours, there have been no military provocations, no hostilities, no shelling. Overall, the Russian Reconciliation Center and the Syrian Army forces evacuated 41,000 people, including 3,000 militants and 8,000 of their family members. We continue to ensure that hostages are released. According to the latest deal, the Jaish al-Islam group released 195 hostages. Starting from tomorrow, to ensure law and order and to provide assistance to the local people, the Russian military police will enter the suburb of Douma. The people of Eastern Ghouta are provided with the necessary humanitarian aid by the UN and by the Russian Reconciliation Center. As part of this mission, 3 humanitarian convoys by the UN have delivered 445 tons of basic necessities. The Russian military supplied 418 tons of food, 8,000 blankets, and more than 400,000 food packages. The Syrian government has embarked on a major effort to restore civil infrastructure in Eastern Ghouta. Overall, Eastern Ghouta seems to go back to normal. Refugees continue to come back to the settlements. About 60,000 people have come back to their homes. Russia's and Syria's success in fighting terrorism have not been perceived in a good way by some of the forces. There have been attempts to stage provocations, including nerve gases, to implicate the Syrian government. The Syrian government and the Russian Reconciliation Center identified those provocations beforehand, and we've informed the media and the international community in advance. On the 3rd of March, we identified a workshop where terrorists put nerve gas into artillery shells in one of the bunkers. The terrorists have not been able to stage any chemical attack against the civilian population. That's why on the 7th of April, there was allegedly the last attempt to fabricate the news that the Syrian army used gas in Eastern Ghouta. The white helmets imitated once again an alleged attack against the people of Douma. The representatives of these pseudo-organizations have staged these provocations in several areas in Syria. They've used children, including babies, for their provocations. The international community is aware of video footage of those rehearsals. On the 9th of April, the day after the alleged chemical attack, the town of Douma was inspected by Russian chemical biological experts and paramedics. They came to the scene and taken samples of soil and traces of a possible nerve agent. But the analysis identified that there have been no chloride chemicals used and no toxic agents. They visited the hospital that was shown by the white helmets. They've interviewed doctors and wounded people that are there, but there have been no evidence that any chemical attack took place.